Short is the story, long is the life.
Wukong's archive presents China Urban Legends, the Tianyi Pavilion.
In the autumn of 2004, I was transferred to work in Ningbo. My office was on Jiajing Street, not far from Sanjiankou, where the three rivers meet. I searched for housing for about 10 days, and finally someone led me to Tianyi Street, to an old residence outside the west wall of Tianyi Pavilion. The house was a two-story wooden building with black tiles and wooden door panels. The lintel was coated with faded tung oil. The landlord's surname was Fan, 68 years old, tall and thin with a slightly hunched back. He spoke little in a slow Ningbo dialect, as if afraid that speaking quickly might leave something out. Old Fan said his ancestors had guarded the books for the Fan family, and this old residence was bought by his grandfather's generation, facing the west wall of Tianyi Pavilion.
On the day I viewed the house, Old Fan took me up to the second floor. Pushing open the back window, I saw it directly faced the ridge of Tianyi Pavilion's roof. In the twilight, that expanse of gray tiles lay quietly, with upturned eaves and corners, like a great bird with folded wings. The west window on the second floor of the pavilion was shut, its window paper yellowed. Old Fan stood by the window for a moment, then said, "You can live here. Just one thing, if you hear noises from the pavilion at night, don't go look, and don't tell anyone." I didn't think much of it at the time. As Old Fan went downstairs, he added another line, "The books of Tianyi Pavilion recognize people. For those they don't recognize, well, what you hear, you treat as if you heard nothing." I moved in mid-September. At night, lying in bed, I could hear the sound of water from Yuehu Lake, across several streets, faint, like someone speaking in the distance. The Tianyi Pavilion that Old Fan talked about had this origin.
During the Jiajing period of the Ming Dynasty, there was a man named Fan Qin in Ningbo. He rose to the position of right vice minister of the Ministry of War. Over 30 years as an official, wherever he went, he bought books along the way, accumulating over 70,000 volumes. After retiring and returning home, he built this library on the west bank of Moon Lake, taking the phrase, "One generates water," from the I Ching, and named it Tianyi Pavilion. In front of the building, he dug a pond called Tianyi Pool. Books fear fire, and water can suppress fire. With many books came many rules. Fan Qin established a family precept with 2 clauses. Books shall not be divided between heirs, and books shall not leave the pavilion. Books were the lifeblood of the Fan family. When sons split the estate, the books could not be split. Books could only be stored in the pavilion, not a single one allowed to be taken out. For descendants to go up and read, the entire clan had to agree, and the keys were kept separately by different branches. Only when all the keys came together could the pavilion door be opened. The Fan family also set an iron rule. Women were not allowed to ascend the pavilion, nor even to approach Tianyi Pool.
When Old Fan told me all this, he was sitting in a bamboo chair in the courtyard, waving a tattered palm leaf fan. He said his great-grandfather was a book guardian hired by the Fan family, in charge of sunning the books, controlling moisture, and warding off insects, living year-round in a small hut outside the pavilion. The guardian wasn't a Fan family member, but the Fangs trusted him. One of the keys rested in his great-grandfather's hands.
"Once you became a book guardian, it was for life," Old Fan said. "My great-grandfather died in that little hut outside the pavilion. When he died, his hand was still clutching a handful of bookmarks."
I listened and didn't take it seriously. In those days, which city didn't have a few old legends about old mansions? The real strangeness began on the night of the 7th day after I moved in. That day I worked overtime until past 11. I came back, showered, and had just lain down when I suddenly heard a sound coming from the west, rustle, rustle, very faint, like someone turning pages one by one. Slowly, carefully, pausing after every few pages, then continuing. I sat up and listened hard. The sound was coming from the direction of Tianyi Pavilion. At 1 in the morning, the pavilion had long been locked up, not even a single light on. I thought it was the wind. But that night there was no wind, the leaves of the paulownia tree outside the window didn't stir at all. The page-turning sound went on for a good 10+ minutes before gradually stopping. I lay back down and thought to myself, probably a stray cat. The next day, I was a bit more cautious and asked Aunt Sue, who ran the tailor shop downstairs. Aunt Sue said she hadn't heard anything, she slept too soundly at night. Then I asked Old Fan. Old Fan was squatting in the courtyard watering the flowers. Hearing my words, his watering paused for a moment.
Page-turning sound. He repeated it, set down the watering can, fished out a cigarette, and lit it. After smoking half of it, he said, "That's the books in the pavilion counting themselves." Counting themselves?
The Fan family's old rule, Old Fan said. With so many books, they fear insects, fear dampness, fear theft. It's a saying passed down from the ancestors. The books in the pavilion count themselves. Every once in a while, the counting sound rings out in the night. Page by page, they turn through themselves one count to see if any are missing.
Who's doing the turning? Old Fan stubbed out the cigarette, stood up, and glanced at me. Don't ask. Ask, and it'll turn the pages for you to see.
I didn't take what Old Fan said seriously, but the page-turning sound didn't stop. In the half-month after I moved in, the sound of pages turning came 5 times, always in the dead of night, between 1 and 2 in the morning, shuffle, shuffle, page after page, lasting a good 10 minutes before stopping. One night I really couldn't sleep, so I got up, walked barefoot to the back window, and pushed it open a crack. The direction of Tianyi Pavilion was pitch black. The west window on the 2nd floor of the pavilion was a dark hollow, no light inside. I stared at that window for a full 5 minutes. Nothing. Just as I was about to close the window, suddenly, something inside that window flickered. Like someone striking a match, or someone holding up an extremely small lamp, swaying once before the window, then going out. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up instantly. I stared at that window for a long time. The light never came again. The page-turning sound stopped too. The next morning, I found Old Fan and told him about the light I'd seen at night. Old Fan was sitting on the threshold picking vegetables. When he finished listening, his hands didn't stop moving. It was a good while before he said, "A light?"
It flickered just once, like a match.
Old Fan put down the vegetables and went inside. After a while he came back out, holding a book in his hand, thread-bound, its cover already yellowed. He handed it to me. "Take a look at this."
I took it. The book wasn't thick, a hand-copied Wen Xuan, an anthology of classical Chinese literature. The handwriting was elegant and fine, a woman's hand. On the flyleaf was written a line of small characters, hand-copied by Xiuyun.
Whose book is this? I asked.
Old Fan didn't answer. He took the book back, carefully tucked it into his coat, and said, "You shouldn't have seen that light. The books of Tianyi Pavilion know their people. When it lights up, it's for someone it recognizes."
For who? Old Fan glanced at me and said 3 words, "It's waiting for her."
During the day, I passed by the east wall of Tianyi Pavilion and made a point of looking at the Tianyi Pool in front of the pavilion. The pool wasn't large, and the water was extremely clear. Through the water's surface I could see the blue bricks at the bottom, laid out in neat rows. But the longer I looked, the more something felt off. The water was clear, yes, but it seemed to have no bottom. The deeper it went, the darker it grew, faint and deep, like a well. A few old men were playing chess at the foot of the wall. I crouched beside them and watched around, then struck up a conversation and asked about the page-turning sounds at Tianyi Pavilion at night. One old man in a straw hat laughed and said, "The page-turning sound is the good part. In the old days, the Tianyi Pool used to make water sounds too, slosh, slosh, like someone climbing up out of the pool, climbing up, then slipping back down, climbing all night long.
Is there something in the pool?
Fanning himself with a palm leaf fan, the old man said, Tianyi Pool connects to Moon Lake connects to the river connects to the sea. There are roads under the water, anything can travel them. The books belong to the Fan family, but the water doesn't belong to the fans. What goes on under the water, the Fan family has no say over. Another old man chimed in, at night, don't go near the pavilion. The books know people, and so does the water. When a stranger walks up to the pool's edge, the water starts to ripple.
I later checked the local gazetteer. Tianyi Pool does indeed connect to Moon Lake. It was dug at the same time Fan Qin built the pavilion, drawing in living water to suppress fire. But that day, after the old men finished speaking, no one was willing to say anything more. They just fanned themselves, squinting at the chessboard, as if none of it had ever been said. From then on, whenever I heard the page-turning sound at night, I didn't dare open the window. But I kept remembering that copy of Wen Xuan in my heart, and the line of elegant small characters on its flyleaf, hand-copied by Xiuyun.
Who Xiuyun was, old Fan didn't tell me right away. He's the quiet type, keeps things close to his chest. When pressed, he'd only say, when the time comes for you to know, you'll know, then squat in the courtyard smoking, letting the ashes fall on his shoe tops without brushing them off. It wasn't until the second month, around the Mid-Autumn Festival, that old Fan finally told me about Xiuyun.
It was a moonlit night. Old Fan came up carrying a jug of wine, saying it was mid-autumn, so I should drink a couple of cups with him. The wine was a local Ningbo vintage, amber-colored, with a rice fragrance going down. Halfway through the jug, old Fan suddenly said, "The copy of Wen Xuan you saw last time." Xiuyun transcribed it.
Who is Xiuyun?
Old Fan filled his own cup to the brim and stared into it. A daughter-in-law of the Fan family. She's been dead for nearly 150 years. This is how old Fan told me Xiuyun's story.
During the Jiaqing reign of the Qing Dynasty, a prefect came to Ningbo. His surname was Qian, and he had a daughter named Qian Xiu Yun. This girl was unlike other young ladies. She had no interest in embroidery. She loved books. From childhood she'd followed her father to his posts and read every book she could get her hands on. There wasn't a book in all of Ningbo she hadn't read, except those in Tianyi Pavilion.
Tianyi Pavilion, the Fan family's library, was the finest under heaven. The pavilion held 70,000 volumes, and the catalogue alone filled a thick book. When Qian Xiu Yun heard about Tianyi Pavilion, she told her father, "All I want in this life is to enter Tianyi Pavilion and read there once." The prefect laughed. The Fan family's books, they don't lend them, don't sell them, and no woman is allowed up the tower. You're a girl. How could you possibly get in? Qian Xiu Yun said, "If I can't get in, I'll marry in."
Back then, the Fan family was a great clan in Ningbo. For one of their sons to take a wife, the prefect's daughter was a well-matched good match. Qian Xiu Yun truly married into the Fan family. She married the sixth-generation descendant of Fan Qin. On her wedding day, the dowry from her family contained no gold or silver, only a chest of books she had copied by her own hand.
She married in, all right. But once inside the Fan household, Xiuyun learned that the clan rules were bigger than heaven. Women were not allowed up the tower. Not only that, they weren't even allowed near the Tianyi pond in front of the pavilion. Tianyi Pavilion was right next to the courtyard where she lived, separated by a single wall. On the other side of that wall was a place her husband could go every day but that she would never enter in her lifetime. Qian Xiu Yun didn't make a fuss. She turned her days into still water. In the daytime she managed the household. At night, under the lamp, she transcribed whatever books she could borrow, one by one. She embroidered sachets, stitching lines from books, Guan Guan Cry the Ospreys, The reeds are lush and green, each stitch fine and careful. Everyone in the Fan household said this daughter-in-law was quiet, virtuous, just a little bit lovesick. Lovesick over books.
Later she fell ill. In her sickness, her only wish was still that book. She'd heard that Tianyi Pavilion held a Song Dynasty edition of Wen Xuan, collected personally by Fan Qin. She wanted just one look. Just one. The Fan family held a full clan meeting. The elders said, "The rules were set by the ancestors. Women may not ascend the tower. If we break precedent, the books can no longer be safeguarded." In the end, the clan refused. Qian Xiu Yun died that winter, before she was even 30. Beneath her pillow lay the copy of Wen Xuan she had transcribed herself.
By the time old Fan got to this point, half the jug was gone. He set down his cup and said, "The Fan family later enshrined her portrait. Not out of respect, out of fear."
Fear? The books she never got to read, they're all in the pavilion, old Fan said. She refused to leave. The books in the pavilion know her.
That night, I lay in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. In the small hours, the sound of pages turning started up again. I stayed in bed and didn't move. After a while, I heard the page turning stop. It stopped for a long time. Then, from the direction of Tianyi Pavilion, came a very faint sigh. Like a woman, on the other side of the wall, letting out one long, slow breath. Days went on as usual. After listening to the rustling of pages at the Tianyi Pavilion for a while, I actually got used to it. It made its noise, and I slept my sleep.
The strange thing was something else. It was a day in October when I biked across the Ling Bridge at Sanjiankou and saw scaffolding set up at both ends, with workers doing repairs. The people of Ningbo call this bridge the Ling Bridge, or the Old Jiang Bridge. It was built in 1936, a single-span steel arch over the Fenghua River, and at the time it was the first bridge of its kind in the country. When I came back that evening, I mentioned it to old Fan. The Ling Bridge is going to get a major repair. They're dredging the mud from under the piers.
Old Fan was watching TV. When he heard this, he turned down the volume and asked, "How far have they dredged?"
From what I hear, they've gotten down to the bases of the piers, and they've pulled out a lot of old stuff.
Old Fan didn't say anything for a good while. Then he said, "Under the pier of the Ling Bridge, there's a door. It was sealed shut in the Republican era."
A door?
In the old days, old Fan said, the Ling Bridge was a pontoon bridge. During the Kangxi reign, there was a high tide. The pontoon bridge broke apart, and a boat full of people drowned. Later they built a stone bridge, and that one collapsed once too. After that, in 1934, the Ningbo Native Association in Shanghai raised funds and hired Germans to build the steel bridge, and only then was it solid. The word Ling in the bridge's name was not chosen casually. The common people called it that. Under the bridge, there is a spirit. Old Fan said the Ling Bridge had two rules, and all the old folks in Ningbo knew them. One, when crossing the bridge at night, if you hear someone calling your name from under the bridge, don't answer. Two, when the tide is rising, don't stand at the bridgehead. In the fall of 1996, old Fan said, a cousin's son of mine was biking across the Ling Bridge at night. When he got to the middle of the bridge, someone under the bridge called his name in a shrill voice, called it twice. He was young and didn't know the rules, so he answered. Old Fan said, the next day he came down with a fever, and it lasted half a month. After the fever broke, there was a sound of water in his ear, a rushing, sloshing sound, like the river water under the bridge had poured in and never left. To this day, that ear is half deaf.
My back went cold as I listened, but I still kept a brave front and said, "That's all old talk."
Old Fan shot me a look. You think it's old talk? The Ling Bridge was completed in 1936. In 1941, the Japanese bombed Ningbo, and bombs landed right next to the bridge, but the bridge wasn't broken. After 1949, the bridge was still fine, but every year during the big tides, people always hear sounds under the bridge. The Germans who built the bridge said that when the piers were driven to the riverbed, there was something down there that wouldn't let them go deeper, so they had to set the footings at a slant. That story was passed down from the site supervisor back then. A few days later, I passed by the Ling bridge again and deliberately stood for a while at the bridgehead. Workers were hauling mud onto the bank, black and slimy, with the fishy smell of the river. Watching from a distance, inside the cofferdam around the bridge pier, a worker pulled out something like an iron door from the mud. So rusted you couldn't tell what it had originally looked like, square and four-sided, with a lock hanging on it. An old-style bronze lock, its keyhole packed full of mud.
The workers gathered around and stared at it for a long time. Someone took a hammer and knocked on it, clang, clang. Then a man in uniform came over, said a few words, and the workers plastered the thing over with concrete again. I went back and asked old Fan. After he heard the whole story, he smoked half a cigarette and said, "Good that they sealed it. Once it's sealed, it won't come out."
What was it?
Old Fan stubbed out the cigarette and said, "I don't know. Nobody knows. It was sealed once during the Republican era, and now it's been sealed again. The things under the Ling Bridge people in Ningbo don't ask. If you ask, the bridge remembers. In November, my unit sent me to Zhenhai on a business trip. Zhenhai sits east of Ningbo, guarding the mouth of the Yong River where it meets the sea, a key coastal defense point. After I finished my work, the rain stopped, and a local colleague said, 'Come on, let me take you up Xiaobao Mountain. If you come to Zhenhai and don't go up Xiaobao, you haven't really been here. Xiaobao Mountain isn't tall, but it's famous. On the mountain stands Weiyuan City, built during the Jiajing reign of the Ming Dynasty to resist Japanese pirates. The stone walls are over a foot thick, packed with crenellations. At the summit is a fort with cast-iron cannons, muzzles pointed out to sea. Standing at the fort looking out, the Yong River runs like a gray ribbon all the way to the ocean. Where river meets sea, the watercolor divides, clear and distinct. My colleague pointed at the sea and said, 'In 1885, during the Sino-French War, French warships fought their way here. The commander was a French admiral named Courbet. Zhujiang's provincial military commander Ouyang Lijian held the line at Xiaobao Mountain, and the Ningbo Shaoxing Taizhou Circuit Intendant Xue Fuqing held Zhenhai City. The fort opened fire and fought for 3 days and 3 nights. The French ships couldn't break through. Courbet was wounded, and later died on the way back. That battle, the people of Ningbo call it the Battle of Zhenhai, was one of the rare sea battles the Qing army won.'
They won? I asked.
My colleague nodded, then added, "They won, sure. But in those 3 days, a lot of people died at the Zhenhai estuary. The old folks say the sea surface turned red. When the tide came in, the bodies drifted out to sea. When it went out, they drifted back into the river. It took more than half a month for them to clear away."
After hearing my colleague's story, I stood by the fort looking at the distant sea, and my heart suddenly felt heavy. That night, rain started again, and I stayed in a small inn at the foot of Xiaobao Mountain. Rain drummed on the tiles and didn't stop all night. In the deep hours, I woke up groggy and heard a sound outside the window, not rain.
It was footsteps. The kind of sound made by hundreds of feet landing on the ground at the same time, mixed with a low, drawn-out command, "Fire," stretched long, like the recitative in old opera. And the sound of iron striking iron, clanking, clanking, dense, as if they were moving something heavy.
I was wide awake in an instant. I rolled out of bed, crawled to the window and looked out. Beyond the window it was pitch black, and through the rain curtain nothing could be seen. But the sound was perfectly clear, coming from the direction of Xiaobao Mountain. Commands, footsteps, one after another, like an army drilling in the night.
The sound went on for a good 10 minutes, then suddenly stopped. As if someone had shouted cease, all the noise vanished at once, leaving only the rain.
The next morning, I told the innkeeper what I had heard in the night. The innkeeper was a local man in his 50s. After listening, he wasn't surprised at all. It happens every year, he said. On rainy nights, sounds of drilling come from Zhaobao Mountain. The soldiers who died at the Jinhai estuary during the Sino-French War never left. They're guarding the sea. As long as the sea is still there, so are they.
Has anyone ever gone up to look?
The innkeeper smiled. People have gone up. Go up and the sounds stop. Come down and they start again. After that, no one went up anymore. At the base of the old wall of Weiyuan City, people burn spirit money every year, without fail through festivals and holidays. Go take a look. At the foot of the wall, the ash from incense has piled up thick. That afternoon, I went up Zhaobao Mountain again and made a point of walking around to the base of Weiyuan City's old wall to look. Sure enough, in the stone crevices at the wall's base, spent incense sticks were stuck in clusters, and there was ash from burnt paper, soaked by the rain, clinging darkly to the ground. On the bricks of the wall was a large dark stain, like it had been scorched by fire, or soaked through with blood, seeping deep into the mortar, impossible to wash away.
I reached out and touched that dark stain. The brick was cold, but I couldn't shake the feeling that beneath my fingertips, deep in the crevices, something was faintly pulsing, like a heartbeat, very slow, one beat, then another. I pulled my hand back quickly and didn't dare touch it again.
When I got back from Jinhai, old Fan asked where I'd been. I said Jinhai. Old Fan nodded and said, out of nowhere. That place at the Jinhai harbor mouth. Heavy within energy. From now on rainy nights, don't stay anywhere under Zhaobao Mountain.
Why?
Old Fan said, places with coastal defenses, that's where the most people died. You think just because the war was won all the dead just left? No. The battles you win, even more people die in those. Governor Ouyang's soldiers, the ones buried along the shore, their graves sit one against the next. The old folks used to say, the soldiers of Jinhai harbor mouth, even in death they're still standing guard. One shift, standing for over 100 years now. Old Fan always talked like that, slow, unhurried, all old sayings. But I kept remembering what he said about, don't stay under Zhaobao Mountain on rainy nights. And for several days after, I couldn't sleep soundly at night. A week later, on a Friday, after dinner I went out for a stroll by myself. Walking along, I ended up at the north bank of the river. The north bank is the old Bund. The port opened there in 1844, even earlier than the Bund in Shanghai. A row of old buildings along the river, English style, French style, and a Catholic church with a pointed spire. The streetlights were dim and yellow, casting their glow over the blue slate pavement.
The old Bund was lively during the day, but at night it was deserted. I walked along the riverfront, and when I got near the docks, I suddenly heard the sound of opera singing drifting across the river. It was opera. A woman's voice, lilting and melodic, singing the 18 farewells scene from the Butterfly Lovers. The river wind carried the singing over to me, broken and intermittent, but crystal clear. You and I, like wild geese, now part ways. Perfect diction, perfect pitch. I stopped, following the sound, and looked out over the river. In the middle of the water, maybe a few dozen meters from shore, a black awning boat was anchored, a single lantern hanging from its bow, dim yellow, swaying gently. On the bow stood a figure, dressed in opera costume, long water sleeves trailing down to the deck, singing directly toward the shore. Past 9 at night. On the river. A black awning boat. A person singing opera. I stood on the bank, rooted to the spot. The performer finished one passage, flicked the water sleeves, turned around on the bow, and seemed to smile toward the shore. Then, the lantern on the boat went out. The moment the light went out, the boat vanished too. The middle of the river was empty, nothing but the sound of water. Splash, splash, like nothing had ever happened. I stood there, my back breaking out in a cold sweat. I quickly turned and started walking back. After a few steps, I heard the singing drift across the river again, still that same passage, 18 farewells, but this time the voice was farther away, like the boat had drifted downstream with the current. Back on Tianyi Street, old Fan was still awake, sitting in the courtyard smoking. When he saw me come in, he lifted his eyelids slightly. "Where'd you go?"
The North Bank. Old Fan's hand paused mid-drag on his cigarette. "You saw the boat?" I froze. "How did you know?"
Old Fan stubbed out his cigarette and said, "The Old Bun's nighttime opera. It's sung for the river. In the old days, the North Bank docks had a lot of boatmen's guilds. They built a stage by the river and put on operas for the boatmen, and for the wandering ghosts passing by. Later the guild scattered, the stage was torn down, but the opera never stopped. On the 1st and 15th of every lunar month, there's still the sound of singing on the river. Local people hear it and take a detour. Nobody stands on the bank to listen."
"Why?" "Listening to opera costs a ticket," Old Fan said. "You stand on the bank and listen for free, it remembers. Once or twice, no problem. Listen too many times, and it invites you onto the boat. Once you're on the boat, you belong to the river."
My back went cold again. That night, I lay in bed, tossing and turning, that line stuck in my ears over and over, "You and I, like wild geese, now part ways." In the small hours, from the direction of Tianyi Pavilion, the sound of pages turning came again. I lay in bed, listening to that rustling, turning sound, and suddenly felt that in this city, behind the walls, under the water, all the unseen things seemed to be awake in the night.
The rustling pages of Tianyi Pavilion, the iron gates of Ling Bridge, the drills on Jiaobao Mountain, the night operas on the Old Bund. This old house I lived in seemed to sit right in the cracks of the city's bones, where every sound from the night could be heard.
After 2 months, I discovered something new. It was a day in December. I got up in the middle of the night for water. The kitchen was on the first floor, lights off. I fumbled my way to the doorway when I suddenly heard a sound beneath my feet, crackle, 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 dense and urgent.
It was the sound of an abacus. I was wide awake in an instant. Past 1 in the morning, under the kitchen floor, someone was working an abacus. The sound wasn't loud, but it was clear as day, rising up from beneath the floorboards, as if separated by a slab of stone. Someone was crouched in a cellar below, flicking through the beads all night long. I stood where I was and listened for a good 2 or 3 minutes. The abacus would sound for a while, then pause, then sound again, like someone going over accounts. A few beads, a stop, a written entry, then more beads.
I crept back upstairs on my toes and didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, I crouched in the kitchen and knocked on the floor. It was solid, no hollow ring. But when I pressed my ear to the ground, I felt something down there, not a sound, but a dull sensation, like someone moving around beneath the floor.
I asked Old Fan. He was out back feeding his chickens. When he heard the question, he finished scattering the rice, dusted off his hands, and said, "Under that kitchen floor is the old vault of a native bank." "A native bank?"
You know Jiangxia Street, right? I did. Ningbo has an old saying, "Travel the whole world and you'll find nothing better than Ningbo's Jiangxia." Jiangxia Street sits beside Ling Bridge. In the old days it was the liveliest place in Ningbo. The entire street lined with money houses, silver shops, and pawn shops, bookkeepers lined up from one end of the street to the other, abacus beads rattling away. Ningbo's native banks were famous across the country, doing business all the way to Shanghai, Hankow, and Tianjin. Back then, people said, "No Ningbo, no market." Old Fan said, "Back in my grandfather's day, the front of this house was a native bank run by the Fong family, one of the big clans of Jiangxia Street. The bank's vault was dug right under the kitchen. A cellar built of blue brick about 10 feet square, where they kept their silver and their account books. In 1966, during the Destroy the Four Olds campaign, the Red Guards ransacked the house. They pried open the Fong family vault, hauled out the silver chests, dragged out the account books, and burned them in the middle of the street. They burned all afternoon, and the ashes blew everywhere with the wind.
And the vault?
That same night after the raid, someone heard the sound of an abacus coming from inside. Old Fan said, "Crackle, crackle," from midnight until dawn. The next day, the head Red Guard took people down to look. The vault was empty, nothing in it. But that night, the abacus sounded again. It went on for 3 nights straight. After that, no one dared go down. They sealed the vault opening with a stone slab and poured cement over it. After that, no one in this house ever mentioned the vault again. And now this abacus sound.
Old Fan looked at me. The accounts aren't settled. What accounts?
A bank keeps 2 books, Old Fan said. One for the living to see, one for the dead. The living's book was burned in the raid. The dead's book is still down in the vault, unfinished. There's an old Ningbo saying, "What you owe, you pay back sooner or later." An account that can't be finished, the abacus will work it on its own. When you hear the abacus at night, don't go down to look. It does its tallying, you get your sleep. The moment you open that door, it will know you're listening, and the account gets put on your head. Those words sent a chill down the back of my neck. From then on, whenever I heard the abacus sound rising from under the kitchen floor at night, I pretended I hadn't heard it. I'd pull the blanket over my head and wait for it to stop on its own. And strange as it was, the abacus would sound for a while, and then it really would stop by itself.
After the winter solstice, my curiosity about Tianyi Pavilion finally outweighed my fear.
The sound of pages turning in Tianyi Pavilion, that faint light in the window, the words written by Xiuyun's own hand on the flyleaf of that copy of selections of refined literature, and Old Fan's cryptic "wait for her." I felt that everyone living in this old mansion was hiding something from me.
I asked someone at my workplace to help, found an excuse about wanting to write an article on Ningbo's local documents, and got myself into the archive room of the Tianyi Pavilion Museum.
The archive room was in a corner of the old building, a small room with bookshelves reaching the ceiling, all lined with thread-bound books and files. The person in charge of the archives was a teacher surnamed Feng, in his 50s, wearing reading glasses, speaking slowly and methodically, a typical Ningbo man. When Teacher Feng heard I wanted to research the history of Tianyi Pavilion, he pushed up his glasses, pulled out a stack of files from a cabinet, and said, "The story of Tianyi Pavilion can't be told in 3 days and 3 nights. Which part do you want to hear?"
I said, "The books. And the people who guarded them."
Teacher Feng looked at me, as if he'd sensed something, but didn't ask further. He opened one of the files and began to speak.
The books of Tianyi Pavilion had a troubled fate. In 1861, when the Taiping army entered Ningbo, the Fan family hid the books in the hollow walls overnight. The Taiping troops occupied the mansion and burned down half the buildings. But the books weren't burned. Hidden in the walls, they survived. In 1914, a book thief surnamed Xue sneaked in through the gaps in the roof tiles, stole over 2,000 volumes, and sold them to book dealers in Shanghai, and the books were resold abroad. The Fan family chased them down everywhere, recovering some, but the rest remain scattered overseas to this day.
What Tianyi Pavilion fears most isn't fire or water, it's people, Teacher Feng said. Fire and water can be guarded against. People can't. The Fan family has guarded these books for over 400 years. Thieves, robbers, arsonists, they've seen every kind.
As I listened, I suddenly asked, "The Fan family had a daughter-in-law named Qian Xiu Yun. Do you know about her?"
Teacher Feng's hand paused. He looked up at me through his reading glasses. "You're looking into her too?"
Two?
Teacher Feng said, "You're the third person to come asking about Qian Xiu Yun. The first 2, one was a novelist, and the other was an old gentleman surnamed Fan who claimed to be a descendant of the Fan family. He comes every few years, and every time he asks the same question.
What question?
Teacher Feng said. He asks, are the collection seals of Tianyi Pavilion still there? Collection seals? Every book in Tianyi Pavilion is stamped with a collection seal, Fan Qin's, the Fan families, vermilion red, one after another, imprinted on the flyleaf. Teacher Feng said. That's the book's identity. Its household registration. The seal is there while the book is there. If the book is lost, the seal goes with it. That old Mr. Fan said that in his lifetime, all he wants is to find the lost books, one by one. For every book recovered, one seal mark returns to its place. My heart stirred. What about Xiuyun? Is there anything about her in the archives? Teacher Feng pulled out a yellowed notebook. In the Fan family genealogy, there's no one named Xiuyun. But in the Inxian County Gazetteer and in unofficial records, there are accounts. During the Daoguang reign, a woman did marry into the Fan family. She loved reading deeply, but because of the family rules, she never once set foot on the upper floor of Tianyi Pavilion in her entire life. She died during the Xianfeng reign. The notes say she copied a book before her death, and that book's whereabouts later became unknown.
Whereabouts unknown? Teacher Feng nodded, closed the notebook, and looked at me. Go back and ask your landlord. He's surnamed Fan. When it comes to this kind of thing, he knows more than I do. I was stunned. How do you know he's surnamed Fan?
Teacher Feng smiled. He comes every few years to check on the collection seals. I've been keeping this archive room for 30 years. Old men surnamed Fan who live by Tianyi Pavilion. He's the only one.
When I walked out of the archive room, it was already getting dark. The old building of Tianyi Pavilion stood quietly in the twilight. The west window on the second floor was pitch black, like a closed eye.
I stood below, looking up at that window for a long time, and suddenly I thought, old Fan comes every few years to ask about the collection seals. What exactly is he looking for? The books? Or something else? That trip to the records room didn't resolve my doubts. It only stirred up more. Why did old Fan go check the collection seals every few years? What exactly was he looking for?
I kept the matter to myself and didn't ask old Fan directly. The opportunity came half a month later. That day I took a cab. The driver was surnamed Yu, in his 50s, from north of the Yangtze. Talkative, the moment I got in, he started chatting about old Ningbo city lore. As I listened, something suddenly came to mind, and I asked, Master, in all your years driving the night shift, have you ever picked up any strange passengers?
Old Yu glanced at me in the rearview mirror and smiled. Young man, the way you ask that, which old night shift driver in Ningbo doesn't have a story or two? He told me one.
One rainy night in the autumn of 2002, old Yu picked up a passenger on the Jiangdong side. The man who got in was an old gentleman, wearing a gray cloth long gown. The fabric was old-fashioned, washed pale, clean and neat, like he'd just changed into it. The old man said, "Take me to Tianyi Pavilion."
Old Yu said, "Tianyi Pavilion's been closed since evening." The old man said, "I know. I'm going home to read some books." Old Yu had his misgivings, but he drove anyway. When they reached the mouth of Tianyi Street, the old man told him to stop, pulled out a piece of paper, handed it over, and said, "Keep the change." Then he got out and walked into Tianyi Street. Old Yu said that as he watched the old man's back, a sudden unease hit him. That stretch of road at the mouth of Tianyi Street, with the walls of Tianyi Pavilion looming dark and heavy, not a single person in sight at night. The old man walked into the darkness, steady on his feet, like he'd walked this road his whole life.
Old Yu looked down at the paper in his hand. It was an old bookmark, apricot yellow, the paper already brittle, with a single character written on it, Yun.
"I didn't think much of it at the time," Old Yu said. "I stuffed it in my pocket and kept driving. The next day when I headed out, I reached into my pocket, guess what?" "What?" The bookmark was gone. It had turned into a piece of yellow paper. Old Yu said, You know, the kind of yellow paper you burn for the dead. Deck-edged, with nothing written on it. My hands went cold on the spot. I remembered perfectly clear, that bookmark from yesterday, with the character Yun on it, apricot yellow, brittle as a dried leaf. How did it become yellow paper after one night's sleep? Old Yu said he later made a special trip back to the mouth of Tianyi Street. He examined that stretch of road along Tianyi Pavilion's west wall carefully in broad daylight, all sealed walls, not even a doorway. Where the old man had walked in, the wall surface was clean, not even a footprint. That old man, did he ever ride in your cab again? I asked. Old Yu was silent for a moment, then said, one more time, in the winter of 2003. He got in over by the old bund again, same grey cloth long gown, same request to go to Tianyi Pavilion. This time I kept my guard up. When we reached the mouth of Tianyi Street, I didn't let him off. I said, old sir, it's so dark out, going in alone, let me drive you to the gate. The old man smiled from the back seat and said, no need. He reached out, pushed open the door, and got out. I watched him. He walked up to the wall, didn't stop, walked straight into it. Gone. On the wall's surface, not even a shadow.
When old Yu got to this point, his voice dropped by half. I only found out later, that time in 2003, when he got out of the car, he said one thing to me. He said, the books are still here, but the people aren't all gathered. Once they're gathered, they can go home.
The books are still here, but the people aren't all gathered. I repeated it, my heart pounding. Old Yu said, I mulled it over for 3 years and couldn't figure it out. Later I came to accept it. Some words in this world were never meant for the living to hear.
I sat in the car, saying nothing for a long time. Outside the window, the streetlights along Tianyi Street fell back one by one. I suddenly thought of old Fan, of teacher Feng in the records room, of the hand copied by Xiuyun on the flyleaf of that anthology, of that phrase, waiting for her. In this city, it seemed everyone who kept watch over Tianyi Pavilion was waiting for something. On the coldest night of that winter, I did something I still regret to this day. I climbed over the wall into Tianyi Pavilion. Here's how it started. That evening, old Fan went out to a wedding banquet and said he wouldn't be back until the next day. After dinner, I sat alone in the courtyard smoking, and the more I sat, the more restless I became. The sound of pages turning in Tianyi Pavilion had been going on for over half a month now, every single night. Teacher Feng's words, old Yu's words, old Fan's words, they all churned together in my head. As if possessed, I stood up, walked to the base of the west wall, stepped onto the stone block in the corner, and climbed over. On the other side of the wall was the courtyard of Tianyi Pavilion. Under the moonlight, the rockery, the pond, the covered walkways, all lay in a dark, indistinct expanse. The old trees in the courtyard had shed their leaves, and their bare branches moaned in the wind. I crouched behind the rockery, hardly daring to breathe, staring at the pavilion. The west window on the second floor was lit. A dim, yellow glow, a small patch of it, like an oil lamp, flickering faintly through the paper window. A figure was cast on the window paper, sitting, head bowed, holding a book, turning pages one by one. Slowly, carefully. After a few pages, it would pause, as if studying something, then continue turning. The sound of pages turning came from right here. Schwalla, schwalla, the sound I'd heard every night for half a year was now right before my eyes, separated by a single window. I stared at that shadow for a long time. The longer I looked, the more something felt wrong. The figure under the lamp cast no shadow. On the window paper, there was only that seated silhouette, holding a book, turning pages one by one. The lamp sat on the windowsill, its flame leaping, but beneath the figure, underneath it, there was nothing. No shadow cast on the tabletop, no shadow behind it. Only that thin outline, pressed against the window paper, like a paper doll cut out and pasted there. My legs went weak all at once. I wanted to climb back over the wall, but I couldn't find the strength in my legs. So I just crouched behind the rockery, not daring to move a muscle, watching that window. The figure inside the window read for a long time. Then, suddenly, it stopped, as if it had heard something. Slowly, it turned its head toward the window. Through the paper window, I could feel it clearly, it was looking at me. Then the shadow on the window paper moved. It stood up, still holding the book, and walked toward the window, as if about to push it open. I didn't care about anything else anymore. I scrambled and tumbled back over the wall, landing on the blue stone slabs of Tianyi Street, my knees aching sharply from the impact. I got up and ran back into my room, locked the door behind me, and sat on the bed, shaking all over. In the deep hours of the night, the sound of pages turning started again. I curled up under the blanket, listening to that shwala shwala sound, with only one thought in my head: he saw me. The next day, old Fan came back. I pretended nothing was wrong and asked him whether there had been any commotion in the pavilion these past 2 days. Old Fan gave me a look that made me feel he already knew everything. He crouched in the courtyard, smoked half a cigarette, and only then said, "The books in the pavilion, they recognize people. The Fan family's books recognize the Fan family, and they recognize those who guard the books. You climbed over the wall and went in. The books saw you, and they've marked you."
So what do I do? Old Fan stubbed out his cigarette and said, "From now on, at night, don't open the window."
Then he stood up and added one more line: "Being marked by them isn't a bad thing. The people the books mark are the people they've been waiting for. When there are enough people waiting, they won't be in a hurry anymore." Old Fan didn't say another word about me climbing over the wall. Since he wouldn't bring it up, I didn't feel right asking. But from that day on, when I heard the page-turning sound at night, I wasn't afraid anymore. Instead, a strange feeling came over me, something hard to put into words. It was as if this old house and that building beyond the wall had finally become connected to me somehow. What really explained that connection was a snowy night in the 12th lunar month.
That night it was snowing. Old Fan came up carrying a jug of wine, saying it was cold and he'd have a couple of drinks with me. After a few rounds, Old Fan opened up. He started talking about 1966.
That year, Old Fan was 21. He lived with his father in the old house outside the west wall of Tianyi Pavilion. His father was a distant relative of the Fan family and also worked at Tianyi Pavilion.
That summer the Red Guards came, Old Fan said. A big crowd of them stormed into Tianyi Pavilion, dragging the books out to burn them. They said the books were part of the four olds, feudal antiques that had to be destroyed. The old man of the Fan family knelt in front of the pavilion, saying the books belonged to the Fans, and if they were going to burn them, they'd have to burn him first. The Red Guards wouldn't listen. They carried the books out box by box, piled half the courtyard with them, poured oil over the pile and got ready to light it.
Old Fan said he was standing outside the crowd when he saw the sky above Tianyi Pavilion suddenly darken. In the middle of summer, storm clouds pressed down so low they looked like they were about to collapse.
They tried to light the fire 3 times, Old Fan said. The first time it had just caught when a gust of wind came and blew it out. The second time, they poured on more oil, the flames started to rise, and then suddenly a rainstorm doused them. The third time, the Red Guards formed a circle to block the wind and tried to light it with matches. They fiddled with it for a long time, striking match after match, but none would light. When the last match was gone, the fire still hadn't started. The leader's face went white. He said, "This is cursed," and he had the book crates carried back inside the pavilion.
What happened after that?
In the end, the books were saved. But the old man of the Fan family, after that kneeling, fell ill and passed away in the autumn, Old Fan said. The night he died, the sound of pages turning echoed through the pavilion all night long. Rustle, rustle, like someone was counting, going through book after book, counting over and over. The next day, when the Red Guards did an inventory, not one book was missing.
Old Fan paused here, poured himself a cup of wine, and drained it before going on. Later on, the books were loaded onto trucks and moved to the countryside, hidden away for a few years. Then in the 1970s, they were brought back. I helped unload the truck that day. The crates had seals on them, and the wax imprint was still the one the old fan man had put on years ago. No one had touched them. But when we opened the crates, the books were all there in perfect order, not one missing, not even out of sequence.
The books were hidden in the countryside for years, no one read them?
Old Fan looked at me and said something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. Books know their home. Wherever you move them, they know the way back. You can't steal them, you can't burn them, they know the way home.
As I listened, chills ran up and down my spine. Old Fan went on. That winter, my father told me something. He said, "The books of Tianyi Pavilion have souls. For over 400 years, thieves, robbers, and book burners, how many people have tried to get at them? Not a single book has been lost. You think it's because the Fan family guarded them well? No, it's because the books guard themselves."
Then, what are the books waiting for?
Old Fan put down his cup and looked at the snow outside the window. Waiting for the right person to read them. The Fan family rule is that books don't leave the pavilion, not because they won't let people read them, but because they're afraid the books might end up with the wrong person. When the one they're waiting for arrives, the door will open on its own. That night, the snow fell all night. In the small hours, the page-turning sound started again, especially clear in the snowy night. Lying in bed listening, I suddenly felt that the sound wasn't as tense as before. Rustle, rustle, page by page, turning calmly, peacefully, like someone was sitting up late with a lamp, quietly reading a book. I lived in that old house on Tianyi Street for 2 full years. In the autumn of 2006, my work unit transferred me back to Shanghai, and I moved out of the old house. The night before I left, Old Fan held a farewell dinner for me in the courtyard, still with that same pot of yellow wine. Midway through, Old Fan said, "Since you're leaving, there's something I want to tell you."
What is it?
"The book collection seal of Tianyi Pavilion," Old Fan said. "I've been searching for it half my life." Old Fan recounted that his father had told him on his deathbed. Before that batch of books was shipped to the countryside in 1966, the elder of the Fan family had taken down the most important collection seal of Tianyi Pavilion, the Tianyi Pavilion vermilion seal that Fan Qin himself had used, from the flyleaf of a book, wrapped it in oil paper, and hidden it between the pages of some book in the pavilion. The elder said, "As long as the seal is there, the soul of the books remains. When the day comes that all the books return, the seal will naturally reveal itself."
I searched for decades and never found it, Old Fan said. But I know it's in the pavilion. That seal, like those books, knows its home. It's waiting. Waiting for who? Old Fan smiled but didn't answer.
In the winter of 2008, Old Fan passed away. He was 71. The neighbors said that in the days before he died, he would carry a chair out every day and sit outside the west wall of Tianyi Pavilion, soaking up the sun, staring at that wall. When someone asked what he was looking at, he said, "On the other side of that wall, there's a book waiting for me to turn to its last page." After 2006, Tianyi Pavilion underwent continuous expansion for several years. The enclosing walls were torn down and rebuilt, and the old houses were demolished too. In the autumn of 2012, I went to Ningbo on business and made a special trip to Tianyi Pavilion. Tianyi Pavilion had become a grand museum, with tourists swarming everywhere. I followed the crowd through a circuit and arrived at a newly opened exhibition hall, where I suddenly stopped.
In a glass display case in the hall rested a small portrait. It showed a young woman in Manchu dress, with gentle, graceful features, holding a scroll of books in her hand. The placard beside the portrait read, Small portrait formerly in the collection of the Fan family library, said to be of Fan family daughter-in-law Qian Xiu Yun.
In front of the portrait lay a pair of embroidered shoes, made of apricot yellow satin, with a single character stitched on the toe, Yun. The stitches were fine and delicate, as if the embroiderer had sewn a lifetime of words into them. I stood before the glass case for a long time. A docent came over and said these were newly received donations. The donor had refused to leave a name, only saying they were a descendant of the Fan family. Suddenly, I understood.
Old Fan had searched for the collection seal his whole life. But perhaps what he was really searching for had never been the seal. What he was waiting for was the woman who had married into the Fan family and never once set foot on the pavilion tower. He kept the books for her. He waited for the day the pavilion doors would open for her. He was gone now, but he had sent her embroidered shoes into Tianyi Pavilion.
Her portrait had entered the pavilion. But the owner of those embroidered shoes had stood outside the wall her entire life. As I walked out of the exhibition hall, dusk was approaching. I stood in the courtyard of Tianyi Pavilion and glanced back at the tower. The west window on the second floor was open, and the room inside was empty, no light, no one. I heard the sound of pages turning stop. It stopped for a long time. Then, a rustle, like someone gently closing a book. I stood in the courtyard for a while, then turned and walked away. When I reached the mouth of Tianyi Street, I looked back once more. The roofline of Tianyi Pavilion lay quietly against the twilight, its eaves curving upward at the tips, like a great bird folding its wings. The west window was still empty, but I knew that inside that window there was a book, just now turned to its last page. The reader it had been waiting for was probably about to arrive. The story is finished. What do you think? If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day.